Good day. Welcome today to today's live event. This is the second of four of a series that Chef Jackie and myself are doing throughout the fall. Chef Jackie is now living in the south of France. He is retired from the French pastry school in Chicago and has moved to France, his homeland. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. But during today's event, we're going to focus on fall seasonal desserts. And Chef has created a few new desserts using some of the techniques from the three courses that we've developed with the French Pastry School at Chef Jackie and Chef Sebastien Canon. So we'll go through each of these recipes. We'll take a look at some of the images. Chef has been inspired by the farmer's market right down the street. So if you joined us for the first of this series, you heard about the farmer's market. We'll talk about it again. But yeah, we have 6 different dishes that he's created in the last couple of weeks. And we're going to kind of show you technique based from what you might learn in the courses to how to get a little bit more creative with some of the fruits and nuts and things of the season that you're going to find going into October and November. So if you haven't been to a live event before, there is a area to ask questions. So on the top right, you can ask the question there. It will queue up. We only have a few questions so far, but ask any question you want. This is kind of a place to stump the chef. Chef Jackie's been doing this for years in the pastry world. I've been doing this for years in the culinary world with a lot of pastry interests. So that's why we do these together. So yeah, ask a question. And after we go through some of the things he's created, we'll get to your questions and elaborate on whatever you've asked. So introducing Chef Jackie Pfeiffer. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Chef. I know you've been doing this for a couple of years.
I've been doing this for 46+ years and still loving it. Pastry, just like culinary, is a passion. You never look at it as a job. It's just so much fun. And then, as you mentioned, I just moved back to my homeland, and it's just a blast to rediscover the beautiful product and then the techniques. And just going to bakeries and then just finding things that we teach in the course. They're right there in front of us in the bakery on a daily basis. So as you mentioned, I follow the season as every chef should do. And we're going to focus on fall desserts, fall flavors, and what makes them special. And then it's always using techniques that we are teaching in our pastry and bread baking courses with Ruby.
Excellent. So for reference, there are a couple links here on the site that you could take a look at. There is a link called Today's Recipes, which is right below my image. And these are the first of the 3 of the recipes that we're showing you today. So if you click that, you'll see the actual recipe. This is what Chef wrote in the last couple of weeks of what he's kind of created in his head. And then we'll talk about where the technique from our courses are focused in those recipes. There's also a couple links under my name and Chef Jackie's name. Will bring you to our Ruby website, which will give you a little bit more information around the 3 courses that we've created. So we have the Introduction to Pastry Arts. It's about a 60-hour course. Bread baking arts with quick breads and artisan breads and breakfast pastries, approximately 80 hours of content. And then the last one we created is a cake baking and decorating course. So the key here is that these courses are giving you some basic techniques, and then from there you can take those techniques and create things similar to what we're going to go through right now. So looking at your list of recipes, Chef, I see some things that are inspiring myself. We're going into a coffee cake, then some candied orange and hazelnut dark chocolate cookies, a nut and coffee tart from Switzerland, an orange flavored brioche, pan de muertos, pumpkin pound cake, and then almond and plum dessert. So all wonderful flavors. Let's start with your first one that you were talking about, the coffee cake. So I know this is an original recipe. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, this is an original recipe. It's kind of like a coffee cake recipe, but a little lighter and richer, I have to say. But there's more eggs in there. There's some dairy product, and again, it's to use the flavor of the fall. So in this particular one, I used pear and pearl and figs that are roasted in the oven to make sure they render some of their water. Otherwise, that water would end up in the coffee cake, and the water turns into steam during the baking and would create a hole, a very unpleasant looking hole around the fruit. That's why we roast the fruit first, and then I like to put them on top of the coffee cake. So during the baking, they can still lose some of their water. Okay. But as every technique, and as you mentioned it, the Ruby courses were built to showcase fundamental techniques. Those are important. They're the most important because from there you can create all kinds of extensions, all kinds of sub recipes using the same techniques. So in this coffee cake, you could use apples and plums, all kinds of fruit from that you can find during the fall. And after that, the sky is the limit. You can put nuts if you want to, but it's a cake that can last 3-4 days at room temperature easily. It doesn't really need to be refrigerated unless you live in Hawaii, just like you.
Yeah, I see the key here that my season is not going to have the pears and the figs and the apples, which I miss from living in Washington. But what you noted here is important, that the cake recipe within this is kind of the base, and then deciding what type of fruit adding to it. And I would say the fruit with the higher water content, doing a slow roast. Were you thinking about 375 to kind of dry them out? Is that about right?
Yeah, 350 to 375, and I'm happy to say that those original recipes, I tested them in the oven right behind me. So it's a regular home oven. It's not a fancy oven, not a fancy chef's oven. And 350 to 375 is a good mark. And one has to be, you have to ask yourself, can I do this with every fruit? For instance, I would not do this with grapes, because grapes are just it's all water pretty much, right? So there's just not enough fiber there. So stick with the pears, the apples, the plums, figs, if there's still figs around, depending where you live. Those are the kind of fruit I would, and then spices. Add the spices that you enjoy. Can also put ginger if you want to. Make it folly.
Yeah, I get pretty inspired when I'm making fruit desserts because I like to kind of go a little savory. This sounds like I would love to take some like minced rosemary and a little bit of minced thyme, small amounts, and then toss it with the fruit before I roasted it, probably with a little bit of butter, just to give it that richness and the flavors before I added it to the coffee cake. Does that sound good?
Yes, absolutely. Well, of course, you have to turn everything to savory, right? Because you're a savory chef, right? But I always welcome that. No, but I welcome that because savory and sweet are always linked. And so, of course, adding herbs is a wonderful idea. After that, one has to be careful to not put too much of it. Like if you put too much rosemary, it will overpower the flavor. But butter. I put butter in the roasting of the fruit, of course, for flavor. And then, like I mentioned before, the sky's the limit as far as adding flavor to this. The key really is to roast the fruit so they don't release any water anymore. They'll release a little bit of water in the butter, but that's gonna taste really good because it's gonna make the butter slightly wet. And it's very pleasant to eat.
Well, I'm excited. So that recipe is in the link on our site here. Great. Let's go to the next recipe. This sounds like a real jacked up chocolate chip cookie, kind of taking the base cookie from the pastry arts program, and you've improvised. I mean, you're telling me about this. It's kind of like a fudgy cookie. You've got candied orange and hazelnut. What else is going on here?
Yeah, that's a cookie that will make you fall on your knees. It's kind of like a cross between a cookie and a ganache. So it's loaded with chocolate and butter. There's also eggs in there, and the key is, so you make the butter. The butter is loose. at first, and then you have to put it in the refrigerator for like maybe 30 minutes, so the fat and the chocolate and the butter will crystallize a little bit and make the batter scoopable.
Hmm.
Then you scoop the cookies on a sheet pan, and then you can top it with whatever you like. Chopped nuts. I used candied orange peel. I did use roasted pear, and the product at the end was not very good because you have the acidity of the pear that was fighting with the acidity of the chocolate, and there was no balance. You see, so I stuck with the sweetness of the candied orange. The nuts will bring a nice crunch, and then the key of this cookie. There's two keys actually. The first key is to not bake it too much. If you bake it around 9-10 minutes, it will and then you let it cool for 5-10 minutes if you can, because you might just eat it right away. And after you let it cool a little bit and you eat it, it's almost like a ganache in the center. It's really, really decadent. Now if you like your cookies a little cakier, then you bake them maybe 11-12 minutes, um, if you want to enjoy those cookies the next day after you bake them the next day, my recommendation is to warm them up slightly so the center will be again moist, right? Because since it's loaded with fat, that fat will crystallize overnight once the cookie is sitting in a box or whatnot. And so warm them up a little bit in an oven for a couple minutes, and they'll get fudgy again. The good news is that the cookies, once they are scooped, they can be refrigerated for 3 days and or frozen for up to 1 month, and
Sounds
then
good.
you just put them on a cookie tray and top them with whatever you like, and you can have a instant decadent chocolate cookies in just a few minutes.
Love it. So I have a basic question that nobody's really asked on this event, but your recipes are all in grams versus cups and teaspoons and tablespoons. Can you tell me the benefit of that for some of the people on this event?
Yes, the benefit is consistency, because when you scale a recipe to the gram, you will have exactly the right weight of each ingredient, and it might not seem so important, but in pastry, it is crucial, absolutely crucial. Every single chef who works in a bakery is weighing every single ingredient on a daily basis. That's the only way you can provide consistency in your product. If you use cups, I counted once. If you have a set of cups and a set of teaspoons, you have 11 pieces of equipment, which one of them is going to get lost, and one or two. And then you have products, let's say flour, they fluctuate, the volume fluctuates with the humidity in the air. If it's drier, the flour will be lighter. If it's more humid wherever you live, when I lived in Chicago in the summer, it was 100% humidity, and in the winter, it was 15% humidity. So the flour would change a lot. And if you measure with a cup, that cup will be more or less full, right? And if a recipe asks for 10 cups of flour, you might make 10 mistakes just scaling the flour. After that, you have everything. And then another thing is scaling a liquid. We scale eggs. We don't scale eggs by 1 egg, 2 egg, a medium egg, a large egg, a small egg. Nobody really, can work like this on a daily basis. So what we do, we just crack a bunch of eggs, we whisk them, and then we weigh them. Yeah. And then this way, if a recipe asks for 50 grams of eggs, you just weigh 50 grams of eggs. You don't have to worry if my egg too big, too small, too medium, this or that. So it's all about consistency, and at the end, it's just great, because if you have a good recipe and you follow it, you follow the scaling and the instruction, you can make that recipe 100 times and it will work out 100 times perfectly.
Exactly what I wanted to hear, a detailed description of why you need a scale.
Yes, absolutely. You see my scale in the background there?
The big one?
Right here.
Yes, the ancient
Yes,
one.
right here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, is there a video we have, Patrick, for these cookies? Awesome. So nice work, Chef Jackie, doing your own production there in south of France with
You
your
see
iPhone.
that? See that? I mean, amazing, right?
All right, let's go into the next recipe. We are
Yes.
It's the classic Swiss tart, the rustic mixed nuts and coffee. How do you say it? Engadine?
Engadine, Chef Scott, you used to work in Switzerland. You should remember that. But
Yes,
I'm not going to hold it against you. You know.
Yeah, so tell me about this.
Yes,
First
go
of all,
ahead.
there's a couple of techniques here that are coming from our pastry arts program. So we have a sweet dough.
Yes.
It's kind of an extension of that, and then the caramels. You're kind of improvising that. So two recipes that we have within the pastry arts program, you've kind of improvised to make this mixed nut tart. Tell us a little bit about what you did.
Absolutely. It's so the sweet dough technique is we changed it into a sablé dough. A sablé dough has a little bit more butter, and it's a little bit more crumbly. And for the Engadine tart, walnut tart, we add a little bit of lemon zest, which brings a very nice zing to this recipe, because this recipe is loaded with caramel. Okay, so to balance this off, you put a little bit of acidity from the lemon zest, you see. And then in our pastry course, we have a caramel candy recipe. So it's the same idea: butter, sugar, heavy cream, and then I added a little coffee, to a little espresso coffee, because espresso coffee enhances the flavor of walnuts and pecans. And typically this recipe, this is a very traditional Swiss recipe that I used to make 40 plus years ago during my apprenticeship, and it's usually only made with walnuts, but I added pecans, and I added almonds and hazelnut, because why not? And the little hint of espresso of coffee really brings the nut flavor out. And again, the marriage between the acidity from the lemon zest and the caramel flavor goes really well together. What's beautiful about this it's like a tart or tort, if you want to call it. You can keep it for a long time in at room temperature. So I I don't really use my microwave here, and so I keep all my baked product that is shelf stable. I keep it in the microwave, and I found a piece of Engadine tart in my microwave a week and a half after I made it, and it was perfectly fine. It does not move. It does not spoil. There's nothing in there that can spoil. So it's something that you can make way in advance for the fall, for the holidays. Also, you can make them as individual tarts, or you can make them as 9-inch tarts. Really, really good recipe to try out.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. Can we see the video, Patrick? Man, that looks delicious. So, Chef, I have a question about the caramel. I know some people that I've worked with before teaching caramel, and they always ask, what happened when it crystallizes? So you're making the caramel. I see that you've added the cream, and then you add the nuts. So you have this mixture. Is it possible that that caramel can recrystallize if you don't pay
No.
attention to something? No.
Once you add the heavy cream, then the fat in the heavy cream is just greasing the caramel. The only way a caramel can crystallize if it's just water and sugar, or just the sugar by itself, and you stir it too much, and then it just recrystallizes. But if caramel, if a caramel mixture crystallizes, all you have to do is put it back on the stove, and it will melt again. You don't have to worry about that. But this particular recipe with the heavy cream cannot crystallize. There's no reason.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, we have a couple more, a few more recipes that you've developed here. The next
Yes.
one's a traditional orange flavored pan de muertos brioche, and I know that we teach brioche in the introduction to pastry arts and the bread baking arts, but you've taken it to the next level. So what did you do here with your creativity, chef?
Well, pan de muerto is a bread that is made in Mexico for All Saints Day, and it's typically made with orange zest in the dough. And usually our brioche dough is made over 2 days, but I just made this as a direct dough. So I mixed it in the morning, let it proof, and then shaped it. And then you see those little sticks. I shaped them into what will look like bones. Okay, that's what it's supposed to represent, bones.
Mm.
And then you let it proof, and then you bake it. And once it's baked, I hit it with melted butter that is mixed with orange juice and um, orange zest. And you
Mm-hmm.
could even put a little bit of orange liquor in there. Why not, right? And then you sprinkle sugar on it, and it's really, really a delicious brioche recipe with a little attitude, I would say. Little Mexican attitude.
So yeah, basically taking the brioche, improvising how you're going to make it using the direct method, and adding a little
Yes.
bit of orange and sugar topping.
Yes. And then you can add also spices if you want to. I mean, the key is to just again use the technique, and then and make it whatever you want it to be. Here it's orange zest, but you can put lemon zest. You can put whatever you want, and then and it was really delicious. Not because I made it, it's because it's just the flavor combination really worked well together.
Nice. Well, thanks for sharing, chef. I know these are all things that you've kind of done in the last couple of weeks.
Yes.
The next one is a pound cake. So you're taking a traditional pound cake, or what are you doing here for the fall fruit and pumpkin pound cake?
I took the exact coffee cake recipe that we have in the bread course, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the market, at the market, I found those small pumpkins. In French, they call potimarron, and then in English, I wrote it down. Hold on, gotta put my glasses on. Hokkaido pumpkin. They're the small pumpkins. They're very nice and very nice orange flesh. And so I roasted them again, roasted pears and pumpkin until they would not release any more water. And so I instead of making it a round pound cake, I made it a long pound cake, and I put a layer of butter, and then a layer of roasted fruit and pumpkin and nuts, and then another layer of butter, and then crumble on top of it. So I really enjoyed the fact that in the middle there were some fruit, and every time I try out something, I just bring it to people that I meet here, and they just loved it. It's and the French are not used to eating pumpkin for dessert. Here pumpkin is used only for soup, you know. So I did it on purpose. I just brought it to them. It was a group of 10 people, and they loved it, you know. They loved it. I said, it's pumpkin. They're like, oh, pumpkin in the cake. Oh, what is that?
Nice.
Is that new? Like, no, it's not new. It's new to you, but it's not new in the US, you know. So it worked really well, again, because of the technique of roasting the fruit and rendering the water. And then here putting the fruit in the middle and on top, that adds a lot of moisture to that coffee cake.
Nice. So just to kind of reiterate, this is coming from the coffee cake recipe that we represent in the bread baking arts, and you're doing a little bit of improvisation.
Yes, in the bread course, it's we have roasted apple in the center, and also there is a sugar and butter mixture that is added to it in our coffee cake recipe. And in this particular recipe, I did not put that because it might be too sweet, you see. So I just used the roasted fruit and pumpkin, and it worked really well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing, Chef. Let's go into the last dessert that you created that seems to be putting together a component of puff pastry, almond cream, and plums, and creating the dessert out of that. And this is representing the puff and the almond from the Introduction to Pastry Arts. We have a couple of those recipes there. So what did you do with this to create something involving the plums?
You know, it's always saying, you know, making good desserts should not never rely on like incredible techniques or incredible fruit or ingredients. It's all about using fundamental recipes. Puff pastry is one of them. We have it in our course. So there's a disc of puff pastry in the bottom of a ramequin, and I sprinkled some nuts on it. I baked the puff pastry for at least 35 minutes. It's got to be fully baked to be completely crispy. And then after that, I added some almond cream, which is in our pear tart course, in our pastry course, pear tart recipe. And then on top of that, I put half a plum. This plum is called Lolita plum. It's a quite large plum, but I went to the market. I felt it was like very juicy. And I think plums are underrated. You know, they should be used much more in pastry because there's just so many varieties of plums that are so flavorful, and they're just easy to find. There's so many different types around that are just absolutely delicious. I think they really should have a bigger place in desserts, especially fall desserts.
Excellent. So let's see a short video of this new creation. Patrick? Right. Well, excellent. Thanks for sharing. So I know there's some questions here. Let's dive right into the Q&A. Thanks for creating these 3 recipes from scratch, Chef, for this event. I know that there's 3 other recipes here or dishes that we've talked about: the pan de muertos, the pound cake from the coffee cake, and then the puff pastry. Would you be willing to take these to the next step and provide a simple recipe for the group here?
Yeah, absolutely. Since we have them already in our course, it'll be easy.
Improvise.
I'm writing it down so I don't forget.
Okay.
Yeah, we will be able to provide them to our viewers for sure.
Excellent. So we've got about 70 people here, and we'll make sure to get those out to you since these are being created from scratch by the chef. So let's move on to the first question. Kathleen, we're answering your question. There are only 3 recipes in the attachment. Will the other recipes be available? Yes, they will, Kathleen.
Yes, Kathleen.
Stay tuned. And the same thing with the Pan de Muerto.
Yeah, I
Karina?
type only with 2 fingers, so okay. So patience.
And so yeah, all 3 recipes will come through to this group, and I'm glad we had at least 3 to start with. The focus here is what can these pastry courses, bread baking arts, and cake courses provide you in terms of technique, and then having chefs' creativity layered on top of this, what you can do once you have that base technique. But let's get you those extra 3 recipes.
Yes.
So we have a question from Karen. Can you speak to fresh pumpkin versus canned? And can you recommend a brand for canned? I know that specifically you would want to use fresh pumpkin for the diced pumpkin that you did with the cake there. But what do you think about fresh versus canned?
Well, canned is usually used for pumpkin pie, and there's plenty of great ones out there. But I always like to use fresh pumpkin because it's a challenge. You have to find some that are very fleshy, right? And so I like to use them in coffee cakes like I did. But another thing that I like to do usually in the fall is you peel and you cut a pumpkin into chunks, and then you roast it in the oven with butter and some brown sugar, and you roast it until it's almost completely dry, right? So those chunks are gonna wrinkle, and then I let them cool, and then I make a vanilla ice cream base with spices, yeah, and I throw those dried out roasted pumpkin pieces in there, and I let it sit like this overnight in the refrigerator. And what will happen is that the ice cream base is going to rehydrate the pumpkin and grab on to all the flavors. And then the next day you have to blend really well this mixture and strain it, because there's always some fiber, and then you just churn it and you have just wonderful pumpkin ice cream.
I love that idea.
Yep.
I've made pumpkin ice cream before, but I didn't do that step in the refrigerator overnight. I kind of made my own pumpkin puree and incorporated it into the ice cream. But that sounds like a better way to infuse the flavors into the cream.
So the reason why I don't want to do the pumpkin puree is because pumpkin puree has water, and now if you add extra water to the ice cream mix, that ice cream might crystallize. You see, so you always have to be careful with when you make ice cream what you add to it. If it contains too much water, it will crystallize. If it contains sugar, it will not only be too sweet, it will not harden. And then if it contains too many solids, it will get grainy, almost chalky, you see. So you gotta be careful. But an idea would be to use half pumpkin puree, half roasted pumpkin. You see, I compromised there with you, chef. So maybe that's an option for people who want to do pumpkin ice cream. Can also make pumpkin creme brulee. Add some pumpkin puree in your creme brulee mix. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 1/3 of the milk you add pumpkin puree and get a wonderful flavor.
Well, I'm getting inspired to make some ice cream now. I haven't done that for a couple of years.
There you go.
So we're gonna move on to the next questions. This is from Lucero. Are you covering Pan de Muerto, or is that a different class? So ultimately, the Pan de Muerto is a brioche dough, and then you're shaping it in a different way with the bone shapes, in addition to the glaze with the orange and sugar glaze and the sugar sprinkled on top. Does that kind of tie up what you did today?
Yes, it's just a brioche recipe, and as we mentioned before, we are going to provide this recipe in time for people to make pan de muerto for I think it's November 1st. Yeah.
So we have a couple of weeks. Right. All right. Next question here is from Kathleen. What can I substitute for almond powder? I have a family member who's allergic to tree nuts, and the recipes have almond powder in them. So what would you suggest for something non-tree nut?
Well, then if you don't want to put almond powder, well, I don't know if coconut is an option. You could use coconut, but usually in the pastry world is like for 10 grams of nut powder, you put 5 gram. I'm writing it down because that's how I remember things. For 10 grams of nut powder, you put 5 grams of wheat flour, you see? So if the recipe calls for 100 grams of almond powder or hazelnut powder, you put half that weight in cake or all-purpose flour. Yeah.
Oh, all right. So, hello, chefs. Please tell me how to keep my pie pastry lighter and flakier, easier to fork into. Mine are chronically tough. Thank you, Hilda. So, lots of things to talk about pie dough or pastry, keeping it lighter. Chef, what comes to mind? My first thing is the gluten might be built up a little bit too much.
Yes.
What's your thought?
Yes, absolutely. So the flour in pie dough has to be all-purpose, cannot be bread. Okay, that's number one. And number two, you cannot overwork your pie dough. If you overwork it, you activate the gluten, and then the dough will get very rubbery and tough. Okay, so work just enough the dough to mix it so it comes together, and then you leave it alone, and then you gotta let it rest in the refrigerator overnight. And what happens there is that the dough will the starch in the flour will absorb the moisture, number one, and number two, the gluten will have a chance to relax a little bit. Yeah. And then the recipe also has to contain enough fat, butter, in order to bring the flakiness. So if there's not enough fat in the recipe, that dough will always be too tough.
Those are some good tips. Hilda, I hope that answers your question. Next question in line is from Chris. This is a ingredient in one of your recipes, chef. What is sea salt de Grande? Am I pronouncing that right?
No, terrible. Your French is still terrible after how many years we've been doing those live events. Anyway, it's salt that is harvested on the coast of Brittany in France. And if you ever go to France, you can see actually how they do it. So it's they take the seawater and they allow the seawater to go into fields that they have like elevated sites, right? And then every day they allow the water to go into a lower field and a lower field. Eventually, as the water evaporates through the sun, with the sun, then the salt will form crystals, and they scrape off those crystals off the surface, and they put it in jars, and that's how you just buy it. You can find it in the US, and it's just wonderful when you smell the salt. You can smell the sea,
That you would call fleur de sel or the gray salt, anything that you're going to find in the flaky gray salt or fresh salt from France. That's going to be like this. So
absolutely, fleur de sel is a good one. Yeah, and it's really untouched, pretty much by humans, other than just scraping it off the beach. And it makes a great salt for savory and dessert.
Yep, I typically use this as or at least gray salt or fleur de sel as a finishing salt on my finished dishes, so that you have the crunch and you taste the sea. Typically on fish dishes, yes. So thanks, Patrick, for putting a link there to the history of it. Next question is from Kathleen. What is your favorite baked product to make, and is it also your favorite baked item to eat? So a little bit getting personal here. Your favorite items, chef?
Well, I've been baking for a long time, and I used to like to make fancy mousse cakes and this and that. But as I get older, now I just I like to eat things that are crusty. I'm staying away from mousses. They just bore me. So anything with a crust, anything with a lot of texture, things that are baked, like a good pound cake, a good bread with some interesting inclusion. That's what excites me. And it sounds very simple, but it can get pretty complex, right? But at the end, it's comfort food that will never go out of style. So anything with a crust and some interesting inclusion is what I like to bake and eat. So that pound cakes, those two pound cakes, the coffee cake and the pound cake are a good representation of what I like to make and eat nowadays.
Yeah, you're making me think of one of the favorite desserts I used to make. I used to work in an Italian restaurant in the 90s, and it was a hazelnut, rosemary, orange frangipane tart. So I made this
There you
amazing,
go.
like sweet dough crust with orange zest and rosemary and toasted hazelnut powder, and then the frangipane filling with whole hazelnuts that have been roasted and crushed lightly, with like a nice spiced pumpkin ice cream. Totally inspiring
Exactly,
me here, Chef.
exactly. Those are desserts that always come around. There's always trends that appear and disappear, and we always fall back on those comfort food desserts.
Yep. All right.
Mhm.
Next question is from Karina again. What's the best flour for the pan de muerto? Is it all-purpose or bread flour? I think I can answer that, but I'll let you
All,
answer it,
all
Chef.
purpose, all purpose is a good one. We use King Arthur flour for that. Uh, bread flour might work, but you got to be careful with the gluten amount. But for this recipe, I used all purpose.
Yep. I typically use bread flour for my sourdough, or I want the structure of a bread. But if I'm doing
Yes,
a light thing like pound cake, I'm going to go with the pastry flour or
yes,
brioche with the all-purpose
yes.
flour, so you don't build up that tough structure.
Yep.
All right, Chef. We have a question from Aldo. Aldo, how are you? Hello, Chef Scott
Hi,
and Chef
hello.
Jackie. Mexican cayeta and guava with cream cheese would be a good option to fill the pan de muerto. Would it be? And what are the
Yes.
recommended fillings do you have? I mean, that sounds like an awesome filling, or two different ones.
So the question is, can you repeat what's the
Well,
recommendation
I think
for?
he's asking if the cayeta with guava and cream cheese would be a great filling, and if we had any other recommendations.
Absolutely. No, no, those are great flavor, the cajeta and the cream cheese. Now after that, how you incorporate it. That would work very well in the you could use the cajeta for the engadine tart because the cajeta has a goat's milk flavor and also would be a great filling for the pound cake and the coffee cake. Um, great flavors there, and in the brioche, you cannot put really cajeta in a brioche, but you can put guava, for sure, like roasted guava, or dried out guava, for sure, absolutely.
Well, there's this guava paste that can't, it doesn't come to mind. I have
Yes,
some in my refrigerator. What is that guava
yes.
paste called? It's the
I don't
no,
remember, but
the
yeah,
guava
I know
paste.
exactly what you're saying, and you can cut it in pieces, and that one would work very well for the pound cake and the coffee cake. I can see it. Aldo is getting me excited.
Yeah. All right, Lucero, we have another question. If we add liquid to the pan de muerto, like the orange liqueur, do we need to compensate with any other dry ingredients, or
No,
what's your concept? No.
no, no, no. Just put a little bit of liquor, a little bit of liquor in there, not a lot. Uh, I don't have a ratio for you, but it's just a little bit. But you don't need to change anything.
Mhm. And is
And
it
then you
true?
can you can also you can also. I was tempted to put candied oranges in the pan de muerto and then soak them into orange liquor. You see, that's if you soak fruit in orange liquor, then the liquor doesn't really affect the dough. That's also how we can sneak in alcohol into ice cream. If you put alcohol into vanilla ice cream directly, that ice cream will have a hard time freezing. But if you let dry raisins soak in the alcohol, and then you incorporate those raisins in the vanilla ice cream, you'll get booze in the ice cream without affecting the consistency. You see, so you got to be sneaky a little bit.
And that's because the alcohol doesn't freeze as well, and you're substituting some of the liquid and so forth. While we're talking about adding liquor to a bread, is it true that if you add alcohol, like the orange liquor, that it's going to help develop the gluten structure, which might make the bread a little tougher? I mean, is that true?
Yeah, but you would never add a lot. You would not. Yeah. You would never add a lot.
I just know that some of my pastry recipes for crusts say a tablespoon of vodka to help improve the structure of your dough.
Yeah, but you don't want to put a lot of alcohol in those recipes. There's no point,
Right.
Just drink it,
All right, next recipe or next question here. Chef Jackie, is there an ingredient that you miss from Chicago that you can't get in France?
That's a great question. What? No, I mean, it's not an ingredient. It's more like things that I used to eat, and I don't even have an example now. But ingredient-wise, it's really great to see the quality of ingredients here. Just quite amazing. Oh, cream cheese. There you go, cream cheese. I have not seen cream cheese here yet in France. I'm gonna have to look a little harder, but that's one that comes to mind, because there's so many great things we can do with cream cheese. But other than that, no. Okay. No, I don't. Nothing comes to mind.
A couple more questions here, Chef. This is actually a comment from Terry. I thoroughly enjoy your events. They're always delightful to attend and enlighten the viewer. Well, I enjoy them too. Now that we're across the world,
Terry.
Chef Jackie, 12 hours apart. Here it's 9:40 in the morning here and 9:40 at night there. Thanks for making these happen.
It's bedtime for me.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. What exciting things are you doing in the south of France from Aruna?
I'm renovating an old farm. I'm rebuilding a bread baking oven. So new photos or videos will come eventually. And then I'm just planting many fruit trees. I'm learning again how to grow fruit and vegetables. I'm building an organic garden, planning to have chickens and maybe goats and this and that. So it's just really, it sounds like old fashioned, but it's going back to basics. And every day I just walk around the piece of land I have, and right now it's mushroom season here, and so I find mushrooms and I just ask people around, can I eat this, can I not eat this, and then it's just great because the people here are very welcoming, and they said, hey, well, I'll take you, we'll go mushroom hunting and so on. So I'm just kind of like rediscovering my homeland. I'm not from the south of France. I'm from the Alsace region. It's also called the Promised Land in France, if you want to know. But the south of France is very lovely, and it's nice to see that you can grow things longer than in Chicago or than in the northern part of France. So I'm really enjoying that.
Nice. So we put your Instagram handle here in the event by the question. So if you want to check out what he's doing, one of the cool things he just mentioned was his bread oven. It's like a bread house. I can't wait to come visit.
It's a commune. I didn't invite you. Just kidding. It is an oven that was a communal oven for the village. The village has only 252 people, and so that oven was the oven used by the whole village, and people would bring, in the 1800s, they would bring items to be baked, and then large loaves of bread and so on. So I am going to renovate it, and then after that, the sky is the limit, right?
Serenity says, "Thank you for sharing. Our pleasure. Every time I talk to Chef, I'm learning something new. So thank you, Chef, for your time."
Thank you, Serenity.
Here's a question from Kathleen: Is almond powder the same as almond flour?
Yes, almond flour, almond meal, almond powder are all the same. It's just nuts that you put in a food processor and you grind it into a powder. So there's no flour added to it. There's nothing added to it. It's just raw nut. So the same goes with hazelnut powder, walnut powder, whatever nut powder. They call it powder. They call it flour. They call it meal. Meal is a little thicker, but at the end, it's just nuts that are processed in a food processor.
All right, we're going to cap off with a trick question. Is there a recipe for macarons that doesn't have nuts and is gluten-free?
You gotta put nuts in there, but a gluten-free. Well, there's no gluten in macarons, so that's already the good news right there, right? You don't put flour in macarons, not in the Parisian macarons. You need to know that there's hundreds of recipes, different regional recipes for macarons in France and in Europe. So the ones that are really trendy right now are those Parisian macarons, they call them. But to make them without nuts, that's a hard one. You would have to find another product that has the same properties of nuts. And macarons are usually made with almonds, and almonds are a nut that is kind of like even in flavor. It doesn't have too strong of a flavor, and it has also a great absorption power, right? It absorbs the moisture in the recipe. Yeah, other nuts are more fatty, and if it's more fatty, fat does not absorb water. So you need to find something like a nut, and I don't know, maybe chickpeas. I don't know, something like this. But it's not easy, to make a macaron that is completely nut free.
All right. And last question of the day before we leave would be, what are the substitutes for vegetable shortening, please? I want to make a pie crust and the recipe asks for it. Well, for me, go ahead, Chef.
Nope. Don't use shortening ever right. For any recipe. Shortening, I don't know my food history well. Shortening was invented. You can read about it, why it was invented. I think it was a shortage of butter a long time ago. Cheaper and does not melt in the sun, right? So, but my students would always tell me, "Hey, chef, can I use shortening for my pie crust, because that's my grandma's recipe?" So, well, I say, "Sure, let me get some shortening and I put it on a piece of bread and you eat it, right?" And they would say, "That's disgusting. Why would somebody do that?" Well, say, if you put it in a pie crust, you will eat it, right? And the problem is, if it does not melt in the sun, it will have a hard time melting inside your body, right? And so it's not a healthy fat. It does not taste like anything. So if you really want to mimic the texture and the properties of shortening, I would advise you to use or butter or clarified butter. That's the clarified butter is probably the closest thing you can use to shortening, but do not use shortening for baking.
Yeah, I have a quick story on this. My great grandmother's pie crust recipe calls for half butter and half shortening. And I knew when I was a kid, we used Crisco, and Crisco had different properties than it does today, which is shortening. And we were making this with my mom and my kids, and she insisted we use the shortening. Like, nope, I don't put shortening. I'm going to substitute butter. Nope, we got to put the shortening. And it had been kind of reformatted and recalculated. The shortening just did not do it. Anyways, we couldn't roll out the dough. I couldn't get it off the counter, and I was baking a pie for a pie contest with my kids, and they're like, "This is the ugliest pie I've ever seen, Dad. Why are we?" It's like, because we used shortening, and I wanted butter. We didn't have the right thing, and it tasted okay, but it didn't taste great. So I would say just look at the shortening and say, I'm going to put butter instead."
So, yeah, it's really a bad product for baking. It has no flavor whatsoever. It's not a natural product. It's not healthy. Just use butter. If shortening does not contain water, butter contains 16% water, and so if you want to get to that exact texture of the shortening, then you use clarified butter, where you cook butter slowly, and then all the water evaporates, and then you let it harden, and then you get something very close to shortening, and at least it's natural.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Chef, for your time, and thanks for everyone for joining. There are 3 extra recipes that we will provide and make sure that we get them to you. The pound cake, the plum dessert, and the pan de muerto. In the meantime, we will be back again November 17th, doing a little bit more fall desserts, but going into some holiday traditions, continuing to use techniques from our courses, but kind of improvising with the season. So I thank you, Chef, for being creative and sharing your recipes with the team.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it a lot.
All right. See you soon. Have a good time.
See you. Thank you. Bye-bye.